or components. What we've discovered is what's missing there is, if you look at the environment in a systemic manner, you actually identify the interrelatedness and interdependence between systems, illustrated here by means of the grey overlaps. How is that helpful? Well, how it's helpful is that it contains a dimension of information, in other words, more information, which you can only observe by looking at the interdependence and interrelatedness. You can't get to those red oval circles of information by looking at the systems in isolation. So the first thing that we've identified is we've come up with a methodology by which you can increase the basket of information. Let me make that simple. By the end of today's presentation, you're going to have some sort of an impression of me. So let's say that I'm an informational compound, and we're going to leave here at the end of the day. Let's assume that everything goes well today, and your impression of me is that I'm a nice person. I'm master of my subject, and you tell your partner at home and your friends, you know, Steyn really knows his stuff. He really knows what he talks about. He's a nice guy. That's your informational compound that you have of me. Because all you've been doing the whole day is to view me in isolation. Now, let's assume tomorrow morning 4 o'clock, as I fly up back to Cape Town, that you happen to be on the airport as well. And you're hearing an argument somewhere in the airport building. And that argument is between me and the ground staff member of Emirates, because they made a mistake with my flight. And I can't get on the next flight. And I'm having an argument with that person. And I'm arguing in such a manner that the argument actually turns ugly. And I'm saying things to this person which shocks you. I'm using language that you really didn't expect from me. Does that change your perception of me? Does it add to the informational compound that you have about me? Yes, of course. Of course it does. You now know something else about Steyn, which you didn't know this afternoon. The secret, however, is, ladies and gentlemen, there was no ways for you to have made that observation if you did not catch me there at a point where I was interrelated and interdependent with another system, another person. You had to view that. Why is there interdependence? Well, because I'm dependent upon this lady to help me, or this gentleman to help me. That's the only reason why I'm arguing. If I weren't dependent upon her help, if there were another 14 airlines waiting for me ready to take me to Cape Town, I wouldn't have argued. But because there's an interdependence, I engage. The interrelatedness, why does she listen me or hear me out? Why is she willing to take this abuse? Well, I'm a customer. And like most businesses, she wouldn't want to lose the customer. So there's the interrelatedness and interdependence here. As with the larger environment, between politics, between economy, between labor, between government, between competitors, between buyers, suppliers. So we have to also look at that interdependence and interrelatedness. It enhances the basket of information. That's the first thing that we discovered. The second thing we discovered is not all that new, but there is an angle to it which I think is valuable that can help you to scan the environment in terms of its dynamism. Most of us know that we have certain systems in the environment over which we have a higher level of influence. So my customers, for instance, or my supplier, I have a strong level of influence, almost a level of power over those systems. We call those transactional systems because they're part of the transaction. They're part of the buying and selling transaction. And in a sense, when you think about them in your head, you always think of them as closer to you, as if they're closer, as if they're around the corner, because you have that level of power, that level of influence over them. They might not necessarily, or they are not necessarily really close. In reality, I have a phenomenally close, very influential relationship with my wife, I would hope. But right now, as I'm standing here, she's 17,000 kilometers away from me. So yes, conceptually in my mind, in my head, she's close, but she's not really. It can be the same with your supplier. You might be importing from America, from Europe, from South Africa. But your level of influence, your relationship determines of how you think about that specific system in the environment. And then we have so-called contextual systems. Those are systems that provide context to the business environment, and we think of them as further away. Politics, the economy, legislation. And the reason why we think of them as further away is we can't really influence them. All we can do is react and respond they're not really far away, are they? Right here in this very room, we are part of the economy. The economy is amongst us. The political situation is amongst us. So it's not really that it's far away. And this is the significance, ladies and gentlemen. In other words, when we look at the environment, to place them in those environmental spheres around the business is actually incorrect, because it creates the impression that they're far and close. Well, what we should actually be looking at, focusing on, is the level of influence that you have over those systems. That you might know already. But what is significant is this level, this relationship, level of influence, this power that you have over that system might change. And if it changes, you need to change your strategic approach towards that system. If you think of the environment in terms of pestle, you will always regard your buyer to be part of the competitive environment. But if you lose a customer, that customer actually moves into a contextual space. You've lost your power over that customer. And if you then want that customer back, you have to change your approach. You can't get them back with the same marketing message that you got them in the first place. Let me use an example again. My daughter is 9 years old. So the other day, I made a suggestion at home, like any father would. I wanted to go away for the weekend. And because my daughter is still 9 and she's so little, she adores me. So the minute I said, let's go away for the weekend, she was up from the table, ran to her bedroom, started packing the dolls and toys, and she was almost in the car already. My son is 13, which means he's a teenager. His reaction to this weekend away was slightly different, because he's growing his own identity now, and to go away with the family is not all that cool. He's not really up to it. So he looks at me from the other side of the table and he says to me, can I think about this? Now, if you put that into this perspective here, my daughter is in a transactional relation to me, high levels of influence. My approach to her is quite simple. I ask, she joins us. My son is in a contextual relation. I have lower levels of influence. If I still want him to join us on the weekend, I have to change my approach. My approach to him and to my daughter, towards him and towards my daughter needs to be significantly different. Otherwise, I'm going to lose him. He's not going to come with. Or if I'm just forcing him, he's going to come with, but he's not going to have a fun time, and neither will I. It's the same with your customer. It's the same with your supplier. So what we constantly need to do is we need to be aware of where is our relational status. Is it transactional? Is it contextual? And depending on where it finds itself, we need to have a different strategic approach towards that. Okay, so what we've come up with in terms of the research is, this is a framework that helps businesses to deal with this dynamism in the environment. We call it the P-square framework. And it's really a framework that tries to use pestle, but also add to pestle, to make it more fluid, to make it more real, so that it's more appropriate in terms of the challenges we're facing during the 21st century. First thing is, obviously it caters for those dimensions. And let me just explain. This is but an example. The idea would not be for you to take this framework and draw your business like this. The idea would be for you to take this as a concept and draw your own environment. Because your customers, your suppliers, the economy, the politics looks different from business to business. It needs to be appropriate to you. What you do need to do though is have a look at the three environmental spheres: internal, transactional and contextual. And depending on your level of influence, you will place certain systems in certain bands here. The lines are dotted, which means that the borders are permeable. So there's movement between those spheres as the relational status changes. And then you draw those interrelatedness, interdependencies, so that you can specifically focus on them for purposes of gathering more information. These color codes that you see here refers to something that pestle does not cater for. Pestle only gives you a picture of the outside world, what you're looking at. What pestle doesn't do is it doesn't include how you're looking at the world. It doesn't include that individual worldview filter in terms of how you're looking at the world. How is that important? Of course it's important. If I hold this up and ask everybody to look here, some of you would see the glass half full, and some of you would see it half empty. That's just how it is, based on your worldview. So we're all looking at exactly the same reality, but some of us are seeing two total opposites of that reality. So if I take the conventional Pesco methodology, all I have is a picture of the world. I have to consider how I'm viewing that outside world as well. And that's what the colored filters there refers to. I'm not going to go into too much detail, other to say that it caters for that in a structured manner so that you make it part of your informational compound. Then of course it caters for the dynamism, leaving that door open. And of course the relationship doesn't just need to digress into the contextual space. If I take my son with and I build the relationship, it might be possible for me to bring him back into the transactional space again. It's the same with your customers. You might have rogue customers that tells you they're never going to come back and they're upset. If you work nicely with them, you can get them back into the transactional space again. So that's backwards and forwards. The important thing, however, is it impacts on your strategic mode. And then we take the different levels of involvement into account between you and environmental systems. That very much refers to this glass half full or half empty with water as well. So the way in which you viewing your customer, are you automatically assuming that they are viewing you the way you are viewing yourself? We had an interesting exercise yesterday with the Spanish group that's under training now, where I took them out to the balcony and I asked them to look at the store and look at the store as if they are customers. And remarkable, the insights that we came up with. First they were a little bit stuck. And first they said, no, they saw the manager and they saw the person in the office and it's good because they have an order system. And I said, whoa, your customers don't know that. View the store through the eyes of a customer. And then they came up with very interesting observations. Some of the aisle markings weren't all that clear. So they didn't know where the product is as working in Spanish, but a customer that walks in there first time might be a little confused. But look at the marketing message. There's freshness, there's value, there's quality. So what is it? What are we communicating to the market? We had a discussion around, is it one message? Is it multiple messages? How wide is that umbrella? All because we got them to look through the eyes of the customer. So we have to take that into account when we start to scan the environment. Let's not assume that the way in which we see the world is the way in which other people are seeing the world. And the framework once again caters in a structured manner for that. So all in all, we're getting a more complete picture of the environment. And that helps us to take better strategic or more appropriate strategic decisions. However, I've only given you the part of the environment so far. I think we need to spend some time on that actual decision making, because I still haven't told you how it's going to help you. You might know a little bit more now, but how do I do this thing? We've said that in the transactional environment, yes, the relationship needs to be strong and I need to be more flexible and adaptable towards those in the contextual environment. But strategy in itself is but the juncture between opportunities and threats and organizational ability. You might know it as a SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So there's my opportunities and threats, this is my strengths and weaknesses. And here in the middle, I can now figure out what I can and cannot do, what I should and shouldn't do. Based on, yes, there's opportunity, but also very much based on the realism of what I can and what I can't. How does this help us once again? Well, we have movement as we spoke about there before. Let me try and link the P-square in terms of the environmental scanning framework with the intelligence matrix. Now before I continue with the intelligence matrix, let me just say that the intelligence matrix by and large is based on work that was done by Steyn and Boone, consultants from the UK, and a very nicely published article which is based on a framework for decision making that was published through the Harvard University Press some 3-4 years ago.